Of course, in this context, it's difficult to see each other. I hope you can see me. I'll be talking this morning about water management and human health. I'm employed at two institutes, actually, at Deltares, which is an international water management research institute. And we also have some people in Jakarta. We have an office there. And the other job I have is indeed at the Radboud University, where I work at the Department of Environmental Sciences. So I combine research and also application. So what I'm going to tell you today is both what you would learn if you do, for example, a course in water management at the Radboud University, but it's also something where you could work in if you would become a water manager after you graduate from university and you start to work maybe at a consultancy company like Deltares, but there are many more of those companies in the world. So it's both an idea about the research, what we do and what you learn, but also what you can do in a job later on. So let me see if I can flip the slides. I have actually two main things I want to share with you today. Is what is water management, and I have a project which I use as an example, which is Lake Toba in Indonesia. It kind of explains what we understand by water management. And the second part of the lecture is about how we link water management to human health. So the first part, what is water management? Lake Toba. So here you have a view of Lake Toba. I think many of you know where it is, and it's really a beautiful lake. Here you have some tourist pictures. Actually, our king and queen who visited Indonesia in the beginning of this year also visited Lake Toba. And you see a map there. It's located in Sumatra. And because of its beauty, it's also a tourist hotspot. And the national government has plans for, I think, about 10 hotspots in Indonesia to develop tourism there. And if I have the correct number, I wrote this from the top of my head. The idea is to have 2 million tourists in the future visiting the area every year. And there would not only have to be tourists from Indonesia, but also international tourists. But the government also asks itself, is this development sustainable for the lake? And that's where our water management research comes in. How can we know what is sustainable for the lake? So we work together with your national government, with the province, with the World Bank. The World Bank financed this research, and there were some indications that there might be something going on in the lake. For example, here you see the next slide. At some parts of the lake there were fish kills, meaning that overnight thousands of dead fish emerged from these fish ponds. So here fish is cultured, and so there appeared to have been a lack of oxygen in the water. And of course, if you have a healthy ecosystem, this is not going to happen. So maybe it's an indication that something is wrong. If you go to the next slide, they used remote sensing to detect algal blooms. And here on the left picture, you see that the water is both dark and maybe some and a bit brownish. There's some sediment, but also there are green areas, and these green areas could be algal blooms. And algal blooms occur when the water has a lot of nutrients in it. So when the water is kind of fertilized, algae can grow fast, especially when there is sunny weather, and then you can get algal blooms like this. And this is also a sign that there's something wrong in the lake, or there could be something wrong. So what we did, we were commissioned, Deltares was commissioned in cooperation with Indonesian institutes to look for what is the water quality status of Lake Toba and how can we improve it, and how can we make use of Lake Toba in a sustainable way. So here you have another view of Lake Toba. You see it's quite a long lake. So max length is 100 kilometers, which is really a big lake. And the most interesting part is its maximum depth, which is more than 500 meters. You can see it in the right, 500-meter depth, which is extraordinary deep. And that, together with the shape, with Samosir Island in the middle, that's making this lake, from a research perspective, very interesting. So what we focused on, because of the fish kills, observed fish kills, and also from the algal blooms that were reported, we were focused on the fertilization of the lake. So how many nutrients from activities from humans leak into the lake, and can we estimate if this is still sustainable or if the lake is going to be affected in some way. And you can imagine that you have sources of these nutrients. They could be domestic, like if you go to the toilet and you flush your toilet and it goes to the lake straight away. You will excrete nutrients. Sorry, is there... oops. The sheets seem to be... Yep, thank you. But also agriculture can leak nutrients, for example, from livestock like pigs or cows, but also from fertilizer, maybe from paddy rice fields or anything that which flows back to the lake. Aquaculture, which you've seen on the previous slide, fish will be fed, and a lot of this feed is it's not being eaten by fish, but is also excreted and also goes directly into the lake. And of course, if you have a lot of tourism, that might also be an extra source of nutrients going into the lake. Let me see, next slide. So what our key goal is, and this might look a little bit complicated, is we have to understand the ecosystem. If we understand the system, even in a relatively simple way, then we can find out how sustainable its use is, and if we need any management of the use of the lake. And here you see on the left, you see what I call driver. On the top it says driver, and you have 4 boxes. It's aquaculture, domestic and tourism, so this is just people, livestock, and below you see agriculture. And we made a kind of a flow chart to show everybody what we think is happening. So with agriculture, you see fish feed, and fish go in fish cages and they emit nutrients. Also for domestic, that people emit nutrients and there's no water treatment. With livestock, you have manure and manure management that goes to the lake. And with agriculture, we have plantation and paddy fields and use of fertilizer, and that's going to the lake. So one step further, we call this pressure. You see that you have excess feed, fish feces, dead fish from aquaculture. Domestic and tourism have organic waste, of course, and then with agriculture you have manure and also nutrient runoff, and that all goes to rivers, which then go to the lake. And if you are a biologist, you might know that in this last part you have primary producers which make use of the nutrients in the lake. So this is a biological functioning of the lake. We link that to the state of the lake. So what are the nutrient concentrations? What is the production of algae? What is the water transparency? What's the oxygen level? And if something goes wrong, you go to the impacts, and there could be algal bloom, but also oxygen depletion, which leads to the fish kills. So this is a maybe a little bit complicated schematic on how this lake is working. But that's what we use to find out if the use of the lake is sustainable or not. So what we found out is that if you add up all the loads of nutrients that are inputted in the lake, you see that the blue one, the aquaculture loads, are the biggest. So our solution is that you have to manage the aquaculture. And we, in the report, we gave many solutions and also provided the costs that are connected to those solutions to lower the input of nutrients in the lake and to have in the future less fish kills and also no algal blooms. But if you have to organize this, you see here a picture of all the actors, so all the organizations that are somehow involved in the lake management. And you see the legend, it says local communities, of course, NGOs, research institutions, local government, provincial government, central government, private sector. Of course, the aquaculture is often private sector. Then you have donors and media. So it's a huge, complex system. And this is what we call a socio-ecological system because it is affecting ecology and ecological system, and it's related to how we are organized, we humans, our society. And so you can imagine that lake management and lake managers, such maybe you will be in the future, will have to know a lot about how does the lake work, but also have to know about how does our society work, because we together have to fix the problems. And it's quite complicated if you have so many institutions. So lake basin management, but you could also read this as integrated river basin management because it's exactly the same. You have to integrate a lot of knowledge fields. So it's about institutions, about participation, which are social things. It's about information. It's about policies, technology, and of course the lake ecosystem as well. So everything is connected. And we have a Master of Science at the Radboud University, and in the pie chart on the left, you see that we have a part life science, a part engineering, but also a part social sciences. And the gray parts are also research parts. So you have to be an all-round kind of person to do water management. So the next part of my talk is about how we link water and health. So the previous part showed that we know and try to know the ecosystem, but from where I work at Deltaris and also at the Radboud University, we noticed that there are also influences of water quality on the human health. And those two knowledge fields, water management and human health, are not really talking to each other. But if they would work together, we might have a better chance of achieving a real societal impact. So this is a figure I took from the World Health Organization, where you at the left see the human pressures on the environment, and then in the box it says climate change, ozone depletion, forest clearance. A lot of these things you might observe also in Indonesia as well, but they happen all over the world. And those ecosystem changes can have either direct impacts or with two ecosystem mediate impacts, or with three indirect impacts when people are moving. And I'll give some examples of the direct health impacts and of the ecosystem mediated health impacts, because those are the things that we might be able to influence with a change in water management. So examples of direct impacts, of course, if you have water shortages on the left, it's a picture from Africa, it has a direct impact. People only have a few wells where they can go to, so they lack drinking water of a good quality. But also sometimes if people only have a few wells and those few wells are even contaminated or have pathogens in them, people will get ill because they all go to the same source of water. So there are different impacts. Of course, the top right one is a picture from the Philippines, I think. And it shows people in flood situations. So this is also a direct impact. You see even people moving along the electricity cables above, which is really dangerous. And below you have a direct impact if you have a bad water quality it also affects people. So if you go to ecosystem-mediated impacts, these are sometimes indirect impacts. And I'll give you an example in the next slide. It is a flow chart going from the left to the right, and it shows how you can get more malaria by applicating fertilizer. So on the left picture, you see a farmer who applies fertilizer upstream in a catchment in Belize. And upstream means that, for example, in the mountains, farmers are using more fertilizer. This fertilizer is carried downstream to a marsh area, and the marsh area will then become more nutrient rich, similar to the Lake Toba case we have seen before. And because there are more nutrients, the vegetation will change, because some of the plants who like nutrients will grow faster, and some of the plants who are not so fond of nutrients will grow slower, and then you get a different vegetation. And often the vegetation change will lead to other species taking advantage of that, hence the name ecosystem mediated. And in this case, the change in marsh culture led to a change in mosquito abundance, and that led to a change in malaria. So here you have fertilizer linked to malaria, which is an ecosystem mediated health impact. So what do we research? Now we are still more on the direct health impacts. So we look at pollutants, waterborne disease, and also floods. And we are having a few projects now on antibiotic resistance increase. For example, at Deltaris, we work together with a hospital in Jakarta to see how because some bacteria are in the hospital and they need very high antibiotic doses. And we want to see if those bacteria, where they come from, if they come from outside of the water. So we're trying to trace the source of those bacteria. And we have a program also on dengue, but that's in the Netherlands. So I give you some examples of pollutants and waterborne diseases related to health risk. So here we conduct a study on microplastics in the Citarum River near Bandung, and we are trying to sample. We work together with the ITB Institute Technology Bandung. And we are trying to sample the microplastics, and then we are looking on the bacteria that grow on the plastics, because we found in literature that other researchers found that there could be more bacteria on the plastics, and that could also become an health risk, because the concentration of pathogens could be higher in water with plastics than in water without plastics. So we're trying to find out what bacteria are growing on the plastics, and is there a higher amount of pathogens and maybe also antibiotic resistance located on those plastics. So this is an example of field work we are doing. Here an example of those emissions. Here you see like a local small farm, and the excretes of the cows, the feces, are directly inputted into the water system. But it's also happening with open defecation. There as excretes of humans are directly inputted in the water system. And of course, here you see an example of pesticide use. Pesticides are used all over the world by all farmers. And if it rains and the pesticides are run off in surface water, it also can have a risk for humans and certainly for the ecosystem. And here you see a typical Indonesian setting, also near Bandung, where you have factories inside a residential area. And sometimes people make use of the river, but it's the same river where the factories also emit to. So and here you see some examples of contact with water by people. So there is a relationship with contact with water. So and there's another source that if you grow food in contaminated water, the food can also be contaminated. Unfortunately, the picture behind the fisherman is obscured, but there's a fisherman fishing in a part of the river that he made clear. So he used the bamboo to make this patch clear, but still the water quality might not be very high, and the fish might be contaminated, but still eaten. So what we're trying to do is to find out, if you have on the left side emissions of pollutants, how does those pollutants go through the river network? How is it transported? And maybe is it broken down a bit or not? And on the left side, you see ways that how people come into contact with water. So by swimming, working with water, maybe washing themselves, bathing. Of course, if you have a flood, then you are also having contact with water that you normally would not be in contact with. You can also inhale if you have water vapor, and by eating food that was grown in water, but also with cooking, you can use water maybe from outside. Of course, you cook the water, so a lot of bacteria die, but still there might be some contamination. And drinking water. And what we're trying to do is to estimate the risks involved on health. So if we can estimate how much health burden there is from pollutants in water, then we can also show the government that if you clean up your system, if you have less pollutants, and maybe people use water treatment, then you can also have so much health gain, which saves a lot of money for society. If you can make that, express that in numbers, and you can show the government, well, these numbers are valid. If you change your policy, you will save a lot of money. Then you might have a better case that it's really going to make a change. Also with floods and health, we, like I said before, the water could be polluted, and there could be bacteria in the water that make you ill. And often at Deltaris, but also in other institutes, we now look at only at the direct casualty. So you see here a graph where you see the weeks and the health burden on the x-axis, and you see that the first red line is talking about direct casualties from floods, and that's what we most look at. But actually, a few days later, or maybe weeks later, you get also other health effects, because after maybe 10 days, there are more mosquitoes. So there could be increase in mosquito diseases like dengue or malaria. And in the first few days, people come into contact with dirty water, and there may be more diarrhea. But on the long term, the blue line, sometimes houses start to mold, and you get really bad air in houses, and that can also cause diseases. So there are many ways that a flood influences human health, and we are trying to see if we can also quantify this. And one way to quantify it is to model. That's what we often do. We make models, and we try to see if we can generate numbers. So here in the white square, you see a disease model, and it's actually the same disease model as they are now using with COVID, with the corona. So you often see graphs like the one below, where you have in red the number of people who are getting ill, and they are talking, at least in the Netherlands, but I assume in Indonesia it's the same, that they want to flatten the curve. So if everybody is taking a distance, then there will be less people ill at the same time. And the models they use to calculate this are the ones shown in the white square, where you have a susceptible population and people are getting infected. In our case, it's a case of a waterborne disease, like cholera, which is dependent on, in the blue, you see the bacterial concentration in water. More bacteria mean more infection. So the susceptible population is partly infected, then you get an infected population, and after some time people recover. And we at Deltaris, we can compute. On the left you see a map, and in the blue you see flooded areas, so we know which areas are flooded, and then we know how many people live there, so we can estimate the number of people that could become ill, and then we can estimate how many people, what is the health impact by estimating how many people get ill. So this is the idea of linking floods to health. And of course, if you know this, you can start to think of solutions. Maybe you move people out, maybe you bring a certain type of medicine to be prepared. There could be any type of solutions to lower the health burden. Actually, I'm already at the end of my talk for today. Oh no, there are some few slides. Sorry, there are some more slides. So this is a graph where they say the determinants of health. So what makes that people become ill? And of course, there are many determinants. You see in the middle here, people are standing here. And the first layer is the lifestyle. So your lifestyle determines if you become ill or not. For example, if you drink a lot or if you smoke a lot, that might be or if you have access to oh no, this is another one. But so this is lifestyle. Community is also determining your health. If you are living in a community where you have easy access to healthcare, or you live in a community where healthcare is is not so good reachable, then this makes a difference. Also, if you live in a community where people take care of you, for like your family, or you live alone, that also makes a difference. The local economy also determines health. Activities you do, so what kind of job you are doing, for example, what kind of environment you live in. There could be the built environment. So if you live in a city where cars are driving all day around emitting gases, or if you live in a natural environment. And of course, we saw if the natural environment is somehow polluted, that also affects our health. And the natural environment is also affected by the global ecosystem. So things like climate change will also affect your local environment, and that can affect your health. So there are many determinants of health. And with water management, we can influence the natural environment and the built environment. And why I think that environmental health, as we see it, so cleaning up the environment and has health benefits, it has some advantages. So if you prevent disease, then there are no healthcare costs. So there are no extra burden for the population. If you have a dirty environment, people might become more ill, go to the hospital, and then you have extra hospital costs. So it's also an societal burden that's lessened. Also, environmental interventions are more sustainable. If you clean up the environment and people are less ill, it's also better than if people take medicine all the time. And also the last one is important because environmental intervention is often the most equitable. It's good for everybody, not only for rich people who can afford medicine. And there's also some research showing this, where you have, this is a theoretical graph where you see on the x-axis the degradation of the ecological system and population health status. So if the degradation on the right with letter A is still not so big, then the population has more or less the similar health status. So all people are affected in the same way because the ecosystem is still okay. But if you move towards the degradation of the ecological system, for example, if you have urbanization, so our cities are going to be bigger and bigger, and also the environment in the city is going to be more polluted, then you see that the poor, middle, and wealthy population groups are starting to diverge in health status, because the poor people do not have the means to buy themselves out of a bad situation, while the middle and the wealthy people have access to clean drinking water in bottles, access to hospitals. So if you read this graph backwards and you clean up the environment, this is going to benefit everybody. So these are a few of the things that we do at the science faculty at Radboud. Most of these things we do in the master phase, but I also give some lectures in the bachelor phase. So, for example, if you'd start doing a bachelor in biology at the Radboud University, then you could go on doing a master in water management, for example, like the one I showed before. It's transnational ecosystem-based water management. And the interesting thing about this master is part in the Netherlands, 1 year at the Radboud University, and it's part in Duisburg-Essen, which is in Germany. It's only 1 hour drive, so it's really close to each other. But it's then you get two cultures for the price of one. And also it's a double degree, and so you have a German and a Dutch degree. So these are the things that, for example, we do at the Radboud University in water management and health. This was my short lecture.
All right, thank you very much, Geertjan. It was indeed an amazing lecture. And for your information, we in Nufikneso Indonesia, we also bridge the cooperations between Deltares and also like the local government in Indonesia. So it's so great to be involved. And before moving the question and answer sessions, we would like to introduce.
Hello,
Natif dari
Vidi. Thank
dari
you. I would
Radboud
like to thank you
University.
to Vidi and Nufikneso. Do you listen to me? Are you listening? Is it?
Yeah.
Can you clear me?
Sepertinya ada delay, Pak. Ada delay, Mbak. Ada delay sepertinya.
Hello, Vidi. I cannot hear you. Okay, I continue.
Okay.
Thank you very much to Vidi and Nufikneso who has arranged this session today, and I also would like to thank to Dr. Geerling, our special guest for today, and my colleague Michelle Bronkhorst. Hello.
Ya, silakan.
Can you hear me clear? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Both Dr. Geerling and my colleague Michelle Bronkhorst are from the Radboud University. Thank you for your support to make this session today happen. And for the participants, I would like to introduce myself that I'm Ponti Caroline. I'm from Grow Office. And what is Grow Office? Here we go. Here's the slide. Grow Office is an official representative of several Dutch universities in Indonesia, including Radboud University. And our office established in 2008. So we have about 12 years of experience in representing Dutch universities for Indonesia. And we are located in Jakarta. So if you are domiciled in Jakarta or the greater area and would like to find the information, you can come to our office. Next. What is the role and function of our Grow Office? We are as the information center about study in the Netherlands, particularly for Radboud University in Nijmegen, and we do free counseling. So if you can see here the picture, it is our daily based activities. So we receive students to find the information about studying in Netherlands, about to find the right university and the right study programs for them. And we also help the students or the candidates for the registration. So we assist the registration, like how to apply, what is the requirements, and how to register online, how to submit your document, etc. And we also host Radboud University's activities in Indonesia, such as like participation in the International Education Fair, or we hold the info session for Radboud University, the visit, etc. And we also arrange pre-departure briefing. In the first slide, our picture with the students, I back a little bit. This is the pre-departure briefing of in the past years when we can meet each other on site. But nowadays, as you all know, that every activities, yeah, just done by online like this today. And maybe our pre-departure briefing for this academic year 2020 will be held online as well, somewhere at the end of July of this month. And our office also has other services such as translation of your documents. All these activities or services is supporting to your application to study or enroll to Radboud University. And we also can do the legalization of the certificates because one of the requirements is like the legalization of your documents, translation, and others. And we also arrange like IELTS preparation course at our office because if you want to study to Radboud University or other university in Netherlands, they require a good score in your IELTS certificates. Okay. So this is a little bit a picture of Radboud University activities in Indonesia. So you can see this. This is our activities from the delegation of Radboud directly coming to Indonesia here during our International European Education Fair, or we call IHAF. And the picture in the bottom is an info session for Radboud University in Jakarta. And on the right picture is also the activities of like information distribution during the fair, together with Radboud University team and our Grow office. So this is a glimpse of our activities with Radboud in connection with Grow office. Of course, Radboud University also has another connection in Indonesia, such as Dr. Geerling has, and others. Okay, next. Okay, so participants here, if you want to know further about our information, about how to pursue your study for your future study to Radboud University, you may contact us. This is our address. Our phone number is there, mobile number, email address, complete the contacts, and you may follow our social media as well. We have Instagram, Facebook. You can join our social media. So feel free for you, students, candidates, or maybe parents, if you want to know further about our information, feel free to contact us. Thank you very much. I think that's so far. I think it's enough, the information. I will send the session back to Fidi. Thanks,
Okay,
Fidi.
thank you, Mbak Ponti. Now, we are going to move to the question and answer sessions. Geertjan, we will show the questions here on the screen. So the first questions is coming from, wait. Okay, we're going to move. Okay, the first questions is, okay, first from Adilatul Latifun Jannah. How many times the research of water quality in a lake or an area should be taken in a year? For example, if you in the Lake Toba.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for the question. We had to advise on the lake monitoring system indeed, and actually for some of the parameters you need continuous measurement. For example, the temperature of the lake in Lake Toba, which is a crucial factor in how the lake functions. We needed to know the temperature distribution from the top level of the lake down to 400 meters, and we would need that continuously. So maybe hourly measures, so we proposed a few what we call buoys to be distributed across the lake that would measure like things like pH, temperature, and maybe also the clarity of the water on a continuous basis, and other parameters, maybe if there are heavy metals in the water, so more complicated parameters, you can do them less. but it's both a question on how fast do the processes go, and also in how many sites you want. So it's time and also space.
Right. So the next questions are another interesting questions. I have seen you answering on the chat box, but it doesn't have any harm to actually rephrase it
No.
here.
Yeah, it's good.
There is no exact standard for microplastic concentrations that will impact the health risk. And WHO still in research for microplastic too. What's your opinion about the high risk for microplastic, and it will also impact the economic sector?
Yeah. Let me see. Based on the ministry, it will be around 7 plus bottled water. Yeah. So for the impact, there's still a lot of unknowns. We know it's going in the food chain. So a colleague of mine actually is working in Semarang with a local university in Semarang. I don't know the exact name, and they are looking for how many plastics are in seafood. So shellfish and fish, and how many are eaten by people. So we're trying to find out how many plastics are going into the environment, and how many of those are ending up in the food chain of humans, but also of animals. And after we know that, we can try to estimate what the health risks are. But these health risks are kind of complicated. So it's not as it is, for example, with heavy metals like lead, that you have a direct impact, or some substance that can cause cancer. That's really direct, and you don't want those in the water. But the health effects of plastics are more subtle, and so that makes it difficult now to put say safe concentration in label on it. So what the governments now say, well, plastic should not be in the water anyway, or in the environment, because it's a non-natural how do you say, substance. So we'd like to reduce the amount of plastics going into the environment. So they are looking into ways to it's actually waste management, to improve the waste management. And so the water bottled industries can think with the government of solutions. For example, they could make reusable bottles where bottles are collected. They could, well, there are many more options they could do if they sit around the table and think about it, I think. And will it impact the economy? I don't know, because sometimes the recycling industry is also a newer form of industry that can also add to the economy. So making a circular economy does not necessarily have to be a bad thing. That's my opinion.
Okay, exactly. Yes, yeah. It's a circular economy is quite popular here in Indonesia. Of course, it's not as popular as in Thailand, for example. But yeah, more and more Dutch know-how and lessons should also be implemented here in Indonesia regarding circular economy. So next question is coming from Rizal Bahri. Is there any technologies of WWTP to reduce the antibiotic agents in wastewater generated in the hospital, and how to trace the antibiotic agents as well as microbial resistance in water body?
Yeah, so there are indeed technologies, but they are not really applied, because they. What I know about those, I'm not really an expert in those water cleaning technologies, but there are some developed that can take medicine out of the water, and also the antibiotic agents. But most efforts are now also going to try and not to get them into the water. So what you do not emit, you do not have to clean up. And how to trace the antibiotic agent, that's what we use DNA analysis for that. So we're trying to find to make use of mobile DNA devices that we can use in the field to measure the amount of antimicrobial resistance. So it's a field device. That's what we are. So you have quick results. That's basically what we want to do.
All right. So there's one interesting questions coming from Rafid
I,
from ITB.
yeah.
I think environmental intervention is important, but poor people in Indonesia, most of them don't understand about that. We need to combine the environmental engineering and social interventions to get the max outcome. Also, I see that you use the DPSIR framework. What is the response from your research? Yeah, what we know from your slides, you have also approached the social environment also besides the lakes. And how was your experience about that?
Well, uh, thank you, Rafid, for your question. I work with the environmental engineering group at the ITB. Maybe you know them. Dwina Rosmini is among of them. Um, um, yeah, so the you've seen from the amount of institutions, for example, involved in Lake Toba, that it's not only about poor people, but I think the issue is more that the institutions are not cooperating as efficiently as should. It's exactly the same in the Netherlands. We have so many institutions and everybody is doing their own thing, and it's difficult sometimes to get what we call an integrated response. And so I think the issue is more with the governance side than with, for example, a group of the population that is not doing the right thing. If they are given the means by the government, I think they could do a lot of good things because they understand what's wrong. And the DIPSA framework, indeed. So we formulated some responses, and as far as I know, for the Lake Toba, they are working on it. So they are now trying to negotiate with the aquaculture industry to lower the emissions. Well, I'm already happy that they think about an integrated way on how to manage the lake. So they want to measure the lake. They want to find out how they can um, move stakeholders to change their behavior. And this is what the response already is from the government. Yeah.
All
So the
right.
response is on monitoring, and the response is on moving stakeholders to lower the emissions.
All right. Okay. We're coming to the next questions.
Oh
There's
yeah.
interesting questions relating to Bali, as you may know. In
Yeah.
Bali, there is a traditional system named subak to manage agricultural water. Nowadays, crops are decreasing, and the system become inactive wherever the crops are changed into building. But in my opinion, their system is really good to maintain the water quality, protecting the rivers and the lake, although there's no crop. What do you think about this? In Indonesia, traditional approach sometimes works better than modern approach. Putu Amarta from Bali.
Yeah. I thanks Putu for your question. Um, I'm not familiar with the traditional system you call subak, but yeah, from my experience, and what I know, I've lived 2 years in the Philippines. That sometimes small scale farmers, they have an interest to give the farm to the next generation, so they will more sustainably use um, their land, because they want the children to also still benefit from the land. And if you scale up production, those type of farmers are more living into the now, I think, and they just want to have maximize the production regardless of the effects. So I can agree with you that sometimes the traditional approach works better than modern approach. Also, I saw in the Netherlands that sometimes a biological farmer who is scaling down is making the same amount of money than a farmer who scales up. And that's interesting to find out about this. So can you make a good living with a traditional system as opposed to scaling up only? Yeah. Thanks for your question. I really like it.
You're welcome. So the next is it's more a thought. It's not a questions, but it's thought on your lecture today. So
Yeah.
oh wait, Yeah, it's a question as well. Sorry. Is there any international research has been conducted involving international universities and independent researchers related to water contaminations nearby international factories that produce viscose rayon into West Java?
Yeah.
I have learned that their toxic waste have contaminated rivers and public water sources. I believe that is one of good examples on your teaching today. Are you
Yeah.
familiar about this, Geertjan?
Yeah. I so the what we're trying to do is to estimate how much of the industry, for example, is contributing to water quality. And the textile industry is also around Bandung. It's a big industry. But interestingly, there are already many technologies that can help lower the emissions from the textile industry. For example, I don't want to advertise the Netherlands all the time, but we have people in the Delft University of Technology who developed a system that you can dye your textile without using any water, and which is really amazing, and it works, and it's now being adopted more and more in the textile industry. So you will have, from coloring your textiles, you would have no emissions to water. That's a big advantage. So I think sometimes it's more about that people have to make the change in their heads, because the technology is always often already there. But it's true that if you only go for cheap production, then you get often more contamination. But I think the customers in countries like the Netherlands have to know, and maybe they can influence the production, because if they buy a expensive piece of cloth, then and it says it's environmentally produced, and you might have the idea that it's not polluting that much. So it has a lot of sides, this one, but it's true. But there are also solutions for this.
Okay, thank you. Maybe this is going to be like the last questions, Geertjan.
Yeah. Okay.
You
Yeah.
mentioned before about the COVID-19. And how do you think the argument regarding COVID-19 situations nowadays, if you relate it to water
Yeah.
management in each countries?
Yeah. Well, first thing is that um, um, in our country they are monitoring now the COVID also by monitoring the sewage system. So apparently, if you measure the amount of virus in the water, in the sewage, you know more earlier if there is an outbreak than if people get tested. So that's an interesting one, and that might also be very useful in Indonesia, I think. Um, but on the other hand, so this is for the monitoring of the disease. On the other hand, um, the doctors say that contamination by water is not happening. So, and that's, I have to believe that, because I'm not a medical professor. So we think it's not a waterborne disease. Although you have the virus and concentrations in the water, it will not survive long enough to be transmitted by the water. That's what they say. So for monitoring, it's really interesting to do. And for COVID and water, there's a less. The other thing that might be happening, if people wash their hands more, and also if they use a lot of disinfectant soap, which is often only for bacteria, not for viruses, then you can get more emissions of disinfectant soap, and that could lead to more, for example, antibiotic resistance in the water. So there's also a downside of this, and unfortunately, with in complicated problems, for every upside there's always a downside. But to summarize, COVID is not a water-related disease, but you can monitor it by monitoring the water.
Wow. Yeah, wow, that's a new knowledge to me. Thank you very much, Geertjan, and also
No
the
problem.
audiences. It's really interesting lecture today. How do you think? How do you think was it, Geertjan? How do you think was the attendees and audiences?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, thanks a lot for all your questions. I always like the questions, because That's the best part of the lecture. You can talk to your
Yes.
audience.
Okay. Yeah, we heard that we know that almost all of our attendees are coming from various backgrounds. So not only like water management or environment, but yeah, that's how rich as the knowledge is, and when we can actually know the diversity to fuse some issues. Okay, I think this going to be the end of the presentations and also the online learning. We would like to thanks again Dr. Geertjan Geerling for the lecture. And yeah, we really appreciate that. And terima kasih banyak untuk seluruh attendees, seluruh visitors untuk lecture hari ini. Kalau misalnya kita memiliki pertanyaan-pertanyaan untuk Nufik Neso Indonesia maupun pertanyaan untuk Geerling, bisa dikomunikasikan ke info@nesoindonesia.org.id. Nanti kita akan melihat dulu relevansi dengan topik yang disediakan oleh Geertjan untuk kita forward ke Geertjan langsung. Terima kasih semuanya. Saya akhiri webinar kali ini dan sampai jumpa di online learning selanjutnya. Terima kasih. Thank you very much, Geertjan. Bye.